From the Oklahoma newsroom, it's time for Thunder Thursday. I'm Jenni Carlson here in studio with our Thunder coverage team, columnist Barry Tramel, Thunder beat writers Erik, Horne, Brett Dawson. We are talking playoffs.
Are you kidding me?
No, I'm not kidding you. We're talking playoffs, guys.
All right.
It's actually here. We now know all the matchups. Thunder in on Monday. On Wednesday night, they get the 4 seed. It's a 4-5 matchup with the Utah Jazz. Guys, we'll do some predictions in a second. But, Brett, considering what we were talking about a week ago, not that long ago, 4, not bad for these guys, right?
Yeah, they really needed to get into a couple of situations. They needed to be either in a multi-way tie that involved Utah, or they needed a tie with Utah. It was the only team they had a head-to-head tiebreaker against. They got what they needed. They got into the situation they needed to get into, and they did that. Obviously, that's good fortune that you really only hold one individual tiebreaker, and that ends up coming into play. But the real advantage is that the Thunder won the last 3 games of the season, and that's going to Houston and taking care of business. Starting out a little sloppily against Miami, a lot sloppily against Miami, but coming back to win that game, really going away in the 4th quarter, and then taking care of business against Memphis. They did what they had to do, got those 3 wins. That was the only thing they could control. Win out and see what happens. They got exactly the outcome they needed this week, and given all the ups and downs, and given particularly, as you said, where they were recently, getting to host a first-round series, pretty significant.
Erik, how do you feel about this matchup with the Jazz? From the Thunder's perspective, I mean, home court, obviously, that's an advantage. You always want to have that. How do you feel about the matchup between these 2 teams?
I feel a whole lot better about the matchup with these 2 teams than I would have any of the top 3 teams. You obviously did not want to play Golden State, Houston, and to some extent Portland in the first round. The Thunder did not play well against, they played okay against Portland, but they didn't win any of those games this year. And Portland matches up better against the Thunder than Utah does. Utah has one guy in Donovan Mitchell who's an individual shot creator, and that one guy just happens to be a 21, 22-year-old rookie. Granted, the Thunder's going to have to go against a team that's been hot since Rudy Gobert came back from injury. He's one of the best defensive players in the league. He might win the Defensive Player of the Year award. But the Thunder this is why the Thunder went and got Paul George, Carmelo Anthony to go along with Russell Westbrook, so they can overwhelm teams when they get to the playoffs with individual shot creators. The Thunder's offense is a lot different than we saw against Utah the first time they played Rudy Gobert, 2nd game of the season, when Russell Westbrook looked indecisive. They were sputtering the ball around. They only scored 80-some odd points in that game. They've come a long way in that stretch, even after losing Andre Robertson. I think the Thunder feels confident going into this series, and most importantly, as Brett was talking about, they wind up closing the season with some key wins, getting home court advantage in the first round. And look, for a Jazz team that's had a great season, they still got to go on the road and open up at the Peak, which is going to be crazy on Sunday, and the Thunder is going to be amped up, and the Thunder, more often than not, is going to be able to put the best players on the court when they have to play the Jazz in this series.
Barry, Erik mentions Rudy Gobert, and obviously fantastic interior defense, but this Jazz team, they really do play collectively some really good defense. Can this Thunder offense overpower that Utah defense?
I would assume not. In the playoffs, everybody's defense gets better. You don't see a lot of 137, 123 games in the playoffs, so I think the Thunder's going to have to win without terribly efficient offense. The good news is that Utah's offense isn't that good. The Thunder should be able to keep some wraps on the Jazz, win games 105-97, 99-94, that kind of thing. Now, one of the problems you have with Utah is when Utah, the kind of game they play, it's often a low-scoring game. And low-scoring games mean tight games, and tight games mean losses for this Thunder squad.
Tight games mean free throws for this Thunder squad.
So, not everything's not sunshine and jelly beans for the Thunder. But the Thunder has the better roster. It has the better collection of talent, and it's got a team built for the playoffs in terms of individual shot makers and guys who generate their own shot, guys that can switch on defense, which isn't that big of a deal against Utah. But, you have to feel good. Erik's right. You have to feel good about this matchup compared to what it could have been or what it looked like it might be just a couple of weeks ago.
Brett, I think the Thunder, and most people that watch the Thunder thought the Spurs might potentially be the best matchup for this team. We see the Spurs in that 8th spot, obviously, going to have to try to take down No, that's not right. They're in the 2 spot, aren't they? They're going against
they're in the
going
7,
against
so
the
yeah, they'll
Warriors.
play-
Yeah,
yeah, the
yeah. So they're going to go against the Warriors. But still, how does this matchup, in your mind, is this the next best option? If the Spurs would be the best matchup option for the Thunder, is this the next one?
Yeah, I like a lot about this one. I think there's a couple of things. One, as Barry said, the offense here isn't really explosive for Utah. So while these games are going to be probably a little lower scoring than the Thunder would like, Utah's probably not going to run away from you offensively. Obviously, Oklahoma City played really well in 4 games against the Jazz in the regular season. Other than they played really well in 3 games. That second game of the season, not so much. But I think the other thing that really plays to the Thunder's advantage here, Utah relies a whole lot, as Erik mentioned, Donovan Mitchell. They rely a whole lot on him to get a lot done offensively. They don't have a bunch of guys that create offense. They are a system offensive team. They get some pretty good shots out of that. They get Joe Ingles threes, that sort of thing. But in terms of like when the game tightens up as it does in the playoffs, they've really only got one guy who can go and do it, and he's never done it in the playoffs. I think that's a big advantage for the Thunder, that Utah is just going to rely so heavily on a rookie at this time of the season.
Erik, a year ago, Brett brings up, a rookie very dependent, the Jazz are. A year ago, the Thunder, much younger. That was one of the big storylines for us around here. Now a more experienced Thunder group with the acquisition of Paul George, Carmelo Anthony, another year under the belt for Steven Adams and guys like that. How much of an advantage does that experience give the Thunder in this matchup?
I think it is a big advantage. Utah was a team that wasn't expecting to be back in this situation this year. Utah went through the playoffs last year with Gordon Hayward, but losing Gordon Hayward, that was one of their more experienced players. And now you got a rookie that's going to be leading things up for you for the most part, besides Rudy Gobert, and a rookie's going to have the ball in his hands a lot. He's going to have to go up against Russell Westbrook's, Paul George's, Carmelo Anthony's, guys that have been through myriad playoff series, who have seen a lot of playoff basketball. Not to mention Steven Adams, who's basically been in the playoffs every season he's been in Oklahoma City, except that one where the Thunder had 6,000 injuries. So you've got a really veteran-laden squad. You got Patrick Patterson, another guy off the bench who's been in some playoff competition. Raymond Felton's seen a ton of playoff basketball. He's a veteran that could have helped the Thunder last year. It's going to make them even better coming off the bench this year. So you got to like what the Thunder has, and also presuming that Corey Brewer is healthy as well. That's a guy who won an NBA championship with Dallas in 2011. So the Thunder's in great shape in terms of their experience, and we've seen that experience all season. It's just a matter of if that experience is going to hit free throws.
You keep coming back to free throws, my
Why
friend.
shouldn't I come back to free throws?
It's a perfectly fine.
Look, they've been better. They've been better over these past 3 games. Off the top of my head, I think they've been better over these past 3 games. They get 38 3-point attempts against Miami.
They were good last night.
That's a good thing too.
They were good last night.
Yeah.
Good night. Yeah, good last night. So
better than being bad in your last game before the playoffs start. Barry, let's talk one last thing about this matchup before we look at a couple other things. Advantages on both sides. Obviously, every team's got their strengths, but what do you feel like the biggest advantage that could play in the Thunder's favor is? What do you feel like the biggest advantage that could play in the Jazz's favor is?
Well, for the Thunder, it's Russell Westbrook. I mean, the Jazz has the backcourt of Mitchell and Ricky Rubio. Not a great setup for Utah. Russell is has been a long-time playoff veteran. Had a bunch of big games in the playoffs. So I mean, Utah's got a decided disadvantage there. The Jazz actually has a little bit of a stature advantage with Favors. They like to play Favors and Gobert together. Favors and Carmelo. Derek Favors could cause some problems for Carmelo Anthony or even Patrick Patterson if Patterson comes in at that power forward slot. So Utah will try to overpower the Thunder. Most teams have not been able to do it. The league's not really conditioned that way anymore. So it's not near as good as having the superstar point guard advantage, but that's where with Gobert and Favors on the boards, inside the paint, even on defense with the rim protection, that's where Utah's advantage is in this series.
All right, we'll do some series predictions here in a little bit, but before we get to that, guys, let's rewind for just a second on the last game of the regular season. It was an important game for a lot of reasons, but we also got a chance to see Russell Westbrook secure another season triple-double average, which only had been done twice before, even a single season. Now he's the first player to do it back-to-back. Erik, we sort of felt like this was a foregone conclusion when he got close after game number 81 that he'd get at least 16 rebounds to secure that. He did. What's the significance in your mind that this guy, back-to-back seasons, averaging a triple-double?
I think it's remarkable, and I don't think that people going into it were lauding it as much as they should have. Now, everybody wants to point to, Russell Westbrook basically manipulating the game with his teammates in terms of, his teammates giving up defensive rebounds to him. But nobody likes to talk about how hard Russell Westbrook goes on the offensive rebounds. Nobody likes to talk about how instinctual he is in terms of just pouncing for loose balls, whether it's on the offensive or defensive side, and how much that turns into fast break opportunities and points for the Thunder going the other way. Thunder had 22 fast break points in the first half against Memphis last night. Granted, it was a G League 10-day contract-laden Memphis team, but 14 of those 22 fast break points were off of Westbrook assists. It's something that helps the Thunder to get their offense going. They're a much better transition offense team than they are a half-court offense team. And I think that a lot of the people in the analytics community have gone so far to disparage the triple-double, something that we lauded for 55 years until Russell Westbrook desensitized us to it in a matter of 2 because he's that great of a player that it overshadows how great this guy is and some of the great things that he does on the floor, setting up teammates, being the greatest rebounding guard of all time, and, just getting 10 points in his sleep, which basically he didn't do that last night, did he? He only got 6 points, didn't he? How many points did he have?
One of the few games.
I forgot how many points he had because he had 20 rebounds and 19 assists. He overwhelmed us with everything else on the floor.
Yeah.
Russell Westbrook is a really good player. We should never forget that. He can be a little bit surly with the media. Sometimes I might take offense to that as well because I have an ego and some pride. But he's awesome. He's a spectacular player. And, 10, 15, 20 years from now, we might not see another player like him.
Definitely so. Brett, you and Erik rode shotgun for both of these seasons. You were both there for a vast majority of these games. You guys split up the road games. But to see this guy do this 2 years in a row, can you say which one you feel like has been more impressive to watch? I mean, 2 totally different situations under which he achieved this. Does one sort of outweigh the other in your mind?
Well, last season to me, because the triple-double, it's a weird comparison because last year he did it with 42 triple-doubles, and this year he did it with 25. So it tells you that there was more variance, and that's in part because he had more help this year. But last year it felt more like he was dragging a team, like he was putting a team on his shoulders. This is a team that's been a little disappointing in terms of the win total. Certainly a little disappointing in close games where last year he was really magical in those games. He had one of the great clutch seasons in the history of the NBA. So I think last year's carries a little more cachet to it. Last year's made him, I think, not just the triple-double average, but everything that went along with it, leading league in scoring, all those clutch games. All that stuff added up to make him the MVP. This year, he really isn't and doesn't belong in that race. When I think about Russell Westbrook's seasons that I covered, last year will be the one, barring something happening in the future, last year will be the one that I always think of as like the consummate Russell Westbrook season. But look, they're both impressive. The triple-double thing, to me, is still cool. I know it has, the triple-double thing didn't die a hero, so it lived long enough to see itself become the villain. Like now it's everybody has to hate on the idea of the triple-double and your stat padding or your chasing or whatever. I'm not as passionate in my defense of it as Westbrook was this week when he was very passionate in his defense of the way he plays. But it's fun to watch. They've been an entertaining team 2 years in a row, and he's been in the center of it.
Barry, you wrote about this after the game on Wednesday night, and the fact is that there are instances where you can see guys essentially sort of creating a barrier for Russell Westbrook to then, crash in there and grab rebounds. You don't normally see guys deferring to anybody. What does all this say to you that, regardless of, there were a lot more situations where he's getting stats based on his sheer will of force, his talent, his skill. But the fact that those moments are out there, what does all this say to you that he was able to do this for a second year, even with this entirely different roster around him?
Well, I sort of think it's charming, the community effort that was sort of put forth by the Thunder. We saw it a little bit last year, seen it, I think, more so even this year with particularly Steven Adams, but other guys too, basically just playing offensive line and protecting the quarterback. Stone Cold's in there and some of the other guys, they're basically just holding off the defense and having Russell come in for the rebound. I think it's a little bit charming. I've not seen in 2 years, I've not seen the Thunder lose the ball because one of their guys deferred to Westbrook for a rebound. So to me, it shows that there's some pretty good chemistry, and this guy that most people believe is the maddest guy in the NBA, the guy playing with the most anger, is actually well beloved by his teammates. Now, he got to this triple-double with some not-so-charming ways, some of it loitering in the lane, not getting out and covering his man. There's a little bit of that. That might have helped him get 30 or 40 rebounds this year. But that's a different issue. That needs to be addressed. He needs to buckle down every possession on defense. But this allowing his teammates basically handing him rebounds, I think it's charming, and I think it's a good sign for Thunder chemistry.
All right, guys, let's talk about the playoffs more broadly. Obviously, a lot of focus, and we'll continue to have focus in the coming days on this Thunder Jazz series. But obviously, the West, I mean, it came down to these final games on Wednesday night. So many games that were out there to determine seeding and who would play who. And, you know, all of these, I think, look like they're going to be some pretty darn good series. On Saturday, the first day, let's just go in the order that we'll see these series get started. And we'll start with the Spurs and Warriors. Mentioned it before. That's the 2-7. Anybody want to pick against the Warriors in this one?
Is Kawhi Leonard going to run out of the tunnel and pull a cast off or something? No.
Yeah.
Unless Kawhi is going to play, and even if Kawhi was going to play after how little he played in the regular season, no.
How many games this one go, guys?
I'm going to say 5.
5?
I'll go 4 with no Kawhi.
Whew.
I'll say 5, the gentleman's sweep.
Okay, all right. So Warriors there, we largely agree. The other Saturday series involving Western Conference teams, New Orleans and Portland. You know, this was obviously a matchup with Portland that a lot of people around here said the Thunder want no part of. New Orleans ends up with the Trailblazers. Erik, what do you think about this series? I mean, obviously the Pelicans, Anthony Davis, fantastic, but we've seen the firepower of the Blazers. How do you see this one going down?
I think it's interesting because, you know, the Blazers didn't finish the season necessarily playing well. They got that last win against Portland, which I think was a good win for them going into the playoffs, but they weren't on that roll when the Thunder saw them. The Blazers are a team that have a great home court advantage. They needed that 3 seed, I think, in order to get New Orleans there. So I think the Blazers are going to win the series, but Anthony Davis has exceeded expectations throughout the season playing without DeMarcus Cousins. I think that, you know, there's a possibility they could steal a game there because Anthony Davis is such a dominant player and he's going to give Nurkic a lot of problems. You know, Drew Holiday's been a great defender all year. He's played really well. And, you know, every once in a while the Pelicans can space the floor. They got Mirotic from Chicago who can really shoot threes, and he stepped up his game. And Etuan Moore, he's a guy who's giving the Thunder problems at times when he played for Chicago. So they got some interesting pieces. I think Portland probably wins the series in 6 games. I'll give one more game to the Pelicans than my heart really feels like. I should. Well, actually, my head feels like I should give them 5 games. I got this whole thing confused. Portland in 6. All right, Portland in 6. Anthony Davis is really good.
He
How about
is
that?
really good. Are we all picking Portland in this one, guys?
Yes, New Orleans got the worst roster in the playoffs, and
The whole thing?
Wait, the Western Conference playoffs?
No.
The whole thing?
Well, yeah. Who's in the East? Got a worse roster than New Orleans.
Just having Anthony Davis on it means it's not the worst one. I tell you who's got a worse roster right now. The Spurs have a worse roster. I'd take the Pelicans roster just because I get Anthony Davis on that roster.
Who wins a Pelicans-Spurs series?
You're
not picking the Pelicans?
You're
picking the Pelicans?
I take the Pelicans.
I would probably.
Spurs can't win there. Spurs can't beat them there.
Okay, so instead of picking,
Now we're picking hypothetical series.
yeah, I know, fictional series, Blazers.
I think the Blazers. I think this one goes long. I think it's 6 or 7. And Erik mentioned the reason I would say why. Drew Holiday gives New Orleans kind of an element that the Thunder doesn't have against those guys. He's not a big guard. He's a 6'3", 6'4"-ish kind of guy who can get down and defend a little bit smaller guys. The Thunder really struggles with the McCollum-Lillard matchup. Holiday gives them a little edge there, and Anthony Davis is the best player in the series. That's a pretty narrow margin because Damian Lillard, also a great player. But I think it's going to be a long series.
6 or 7, huh?
6 or 7, but the Blazers win.
Barry, you going?
Portland in 5.
Ooh.
Okay. All right. I knew that was going to be a shorter series
Smoke
after what Barry said
that
before.
worst roster in the league.
All right. I'm going a little off script. We're not going to go chronological on the starts because the Thunder will play before Minnesota goes to Houston. But, you know, Houston, Barry, I mean, I don't know if anybody expected they'd be the 1 seed when this season started. Here they sit against a team that had to fight and scratch and claw to get in at the 8. Any reason to believe Houston won't roll through, pretty young, inexperienced, maybe just happy to be there type of roster from Minnesota?
Well, I don't know that Minnesota's happy to be anywhere when Tom Thibodeau is your coach. So, they're going to be ready to play. But it's a great matchup for Houston. Minnesota's defense, despite the presence of Thibodeau and old pal Taj Gibson, Minnesota's defense is not very good. Houston will light up the Timberwolves. Minnesota can score when you got Kathmandu, Karl Anthony Towns, and Jeff Teague, and you got Jimmy Butler, you got Andrew Wiggins, you got guys that can score. Minnesota's going to score. This is going to be probably the funnest series in the first round, and but Houston's just going to score too much. I mean, I would expect the Rockets to get into the 120s and 130s on a regular basis.
Sounds a little bit like the Thunder Rockets series a year ago, where you expected Houston to win it ultimately, but really good games.
No. If I tell you what, if you think this series is gonna be fun, enjoy it while it lasts. It's gonna go 4 games, and Houston's gonna average about 125 to 130 points, and they're gonna roll. They average 129 points per 100 possessions in the regular season against Minnesota. Jimmy Butler played most of the time. He's still not gonna be himself. The Rockets, I do think that Mbah a Moute, if he can't play, is a factor because defensively he really helps, and they've gotten much better defensively. He's been a huge part of it. They are going to score at will against the Wolves.
Brett goes Houston in 4. Eric?
Yeah, I struggle to even give Minnesota a game.
Hey, worst rosters in the playoffs. Miami gets in that. Miami's in that mix too.
That was the one I was going to counter with, but I wasn't quite sure off the top of my head. Yeah, I'll say Houston sweeps it. As Brett said, Minnesota's defense is not very good. And of the teams that were going into that last week or two of the season in the West, it was the Thunder and Minnesota that we had the most questions about. Minnesota has not been playing particularly well. They had to take Denver to overtime last night just to get into the playoffs, so I don't foresee good things happening for them against Houston.
4 or 5 Houston for Eric. 4. All right, Barry?
I'll go 5. I think Timberwolves get
nice
1.
Of you.
Get 1.
That's nice of you.
All right, now let's talk about the series that folks around here are most interested in, that Thunder Jazz series. Everybody gets their say. Barry, what do you say about this?
I'll take the Thunder in 6. The Thunder's actually been playing better on the road. They've been playing better on the road than at home the last couple of weeks. So, veteran playoff team. I think Rudy Gobert causes problems for everybody. Utah will win a couple, but I think the Thunder wins in 6.
Eric?
Thunder in 7. I think the home court advantage is a big deal in this series. I do like that the Thunder's been playing better on the road in the past week or so. Cannot devalue the Thunder going on the road against Houston and Miami against some dire circumstances, particularly getting down as badly as they did against Miami. I think that does a lot for a team's confidence being able to go on the road. And the Thunder's won on the road I almost said Miami again, in Utah. I don't know why am I in Miami?
So similar.
Vacation? You want to go?
South Beach. I've never been. But I think the Thunder, they've been to Utah before. They've won big games there. Russell Westbrook hit a game winner there last year. They went to Utah and put the defensive clamps on them this year at one point in time. I think they forced 20 turnovers in a game. Paul George had 6 steals or so. They've played well in Utah before. They played close games in Utah before. They've closed out close games in Utah in the past couple of years, and I think that'll help them in this series.
Brett?
Yeah, I was going to say Thunder in 6, and then Barry said it, so I thought, well, maybe I'll say Thunder in 7, and Eric said it, so I'm just going to go back to 6.
Pick 5.
I'm not going to go with 5. Okay. I think Utah's going to get a couple of games. Barry mentioned a guy earlier who I think is a factor here. Ricky Rubio does a pretty nice job with Russell Westbrook. He's at least going to make him work. He's pretty good at kind of getting into him defensively. So I think that'll disrupt some things. These will be some pretty ugly games. But I do like the way the Thunder's playing, and I do like just the massive advantage in terms of just the sheer number of guys who have played in big playoff games. I think that's going to matter this time of year. I don't expect the Thunder to fix every issue it has. Free throws are still going to be a problem. It's still going to have a couple games where it can't make any shots. But I think 6 games is a pretty good number.
Don't think we should overlook the fact that Thabo Sefolosha is a guy that's not going to be a part of this series. He's a guy who's familiar with the Thunder. He's defended Russell Westbrook pretty well. I mean, Westbrook still gets his buckets regardless, but he's forced Russell Westbrook into some tough shots. Tabo's a smart guy, smart defender, can hit a three-point shot. I think he's a guy who would have been pretty valuable in this series, and he's not going to be available. So that's another bench piece that's going to be missing for Utah. And Utah now missing, while they have a guy in Royce O'Neal who's really stepped up his game since post-trade deadline, they're missing a guy in Rodney Hood who used to roast the Thunder.
Yeah.
Rodney Hood used to give the Thunder buckets. And he's a 6'8", versatile wing, left-handed shooter that can really hit the three-pointer on the Thunder. And that guy's not there anymore. So that's another place where Utah's going to have to step it up.
Royce O'Neal's a big name in this series, I would say. I don't think Utah can win if he's not really good.
It's going to be interesting to see. We haven't heard anything definitive yet on Corey Brewer, where his situation is. We'll have to wait and see on that. I'm going to be an optimist. I'm going to say Thunder in 5. Nobody went there, so I think I will. What the heck? We'll see how it goes. First game Sunday night, 5:30. It's actually Friday, Sunday afternoon with 5:30 start at the Peak. And then game 2, Wednesday night, 7 o'clock, again at the Peak. Be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoman.